no mark of disease, no wound of man, yet the life had already been taken from them.
The water carried no reflection of cause, only the trace of something that had already passed.
They had seen crows before, but never one that chose to remain and observe. Within the shelter of walls, the silence deepened, as though something had entered with them. The air no longer moved as it should, as if the land itself had begun to resist. The field lay still, not in peace, but in something far closer to submission. It was not death that disturbed him, but the absence of any struggle before it. They spoke less now, not from calm, but from the growing weight of what they could not explain. The sky gathered its silence, long before any of them understood what had begun. It was not sickness, because sickness does not decide who remains and who is emptied. The old markings were not warnings, but remnants of something once understood and then abandoned. Some truths are not spoken aloud, because to name them is to accept them as real.
They had heard of her before, not as a presence, but as something that arrives before the end.
Nothing. To act was to risk everything, yet to remain still was to accept what had already begun. They understood then, this was not something to stop, but something to face directly. The land itself held the boundary, and once crossed, nothing would remain unchanged. They did not call to it. They stepped into where it already waited. They did not begin the ritual. They aligned themselves with something already in place. Blood was never an offering. It was a declaration that they would be counted. Nothing was placed by chance. Every position had already been decided long before them.
Words held no place here, because anything spoken would already be known.
They had done nothing to summon it, yet everything now was in place for it to see them. They did not feel its arrival, only the quiet certainty that they were no longer alone.
The air grew heavier, not with wind, but with something that pressed inward. What they saw, Nolanda.
It did not appear before them. It positioned itself where it could observe them most clearly.
They had not summoned it. They had only placed themselves where it had always been waiting.
She did not enter their world. She allowed herself to be noticed within it.
Doubt did not weaken them. It divided what they believed from what they had seen. The Watcher took form not to reveal itself, but to remain present without question. At the edge of water, something worked in silence, preparing what had not yet happened. It did not need to appear fully, because every part of it was already in place.
The first fracture did not come from it, but from within them, where doubt had taken root.
Suspicion did not need reason. It only needed silence to grow into certainty. It was not the presence that broke the order, but the choice to act without certainty. The ground did not react in anger, only in correction. as if restoring what had been altered.
Fear no longer waited for understanding. It acted before thought could restrain it.
Control did not vanish at once. It slipped away in moments they believed they could still manage.
When fear demanded action, it no longer mattered whether the choice was right.
The boundary did not prevent them from leaving. It simply ensured they would not return unchanged.
She had not escaped the space. She had only moved into a version of it that no longer followed the same order.
Separation was never an accident. It was the first clear measure of what would follow.
Alone. The path no longer led forward, it turned inward. The sound returned, not to guide her, but to confirm what had already been decided. There was no struggle left, only the quiet understanding that nothing could be undone.
The first to fall was not taken. She was simply no longer allowed to remain.
He did not search for her, because he already understood that she had not been lost. Understanding did not grant control. It only revealed how little control he truly had.
He did not break the rule directly. He bent it just enough to believe he had not.
The consequence did not follow him immediately, because it had already begun to form. The space around him did not shrink. It closed, as if removing every path that did not belong.
He believed he remained within the order, until the order itself began to shift around him.
He did not step out of place. The place itself moved beyond him. There was no correction left to make, only the moment where he understood what had already been decided.
He was not taken. He was simply no longer held within what allowed him to remain.
When all movement ceased, what remained was not emptiness, but completion. What had been placed was no longer needed, and so it was quietly undone. The land did not remember what had happened, because it had never been disturbed. No trace remained of those who stood there, only the certainty that they had been measured. It was never a question of survival, only of who was permitted to remain.
The world continued as it always had, untouched by what it could not perceive. Yet something remained, not in form, but in the absence of what once was.
They did not count who was missing, because no memory insisted they should.
Their names were not spoken again, not because they were forgotten, but because they were never held. What had watched them no longer needed to remain, because its work had been completed. The land returned to its pattern, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. It was never chaos that governed them, but a quiet order they could not perceive. They had not been tested to survive. They had been measured to remain. No one was chosen. The unworthy were simply removed.
The ritual was never opened, because it had never been closed.